Good morning, everyone. Last time we have explained about the types of food chain. There are two types of food chain. One, namely grazing food chain, which starts with plant or grass as a producer and then are consumed by grasses or plants are consumed by herbivores. These herbivores then consumed by carnivores of primary or secondary or tertiary level, and thus forming the various organisms which are eating one another, but starts with the plants or the producers, and hence is called as the grazing food chain. Then second type we have explained that detritus type of food chain, and detritus type of food chain starts with the decaying organic matter as a first feeding level or first trophic level. As in grazing food chain, the plants or the producers or the grasses serves as a first feeding level or a first trophic level of the food chain, and in a detritus food chain, dead and decaying organic matter derived from plant and animal origin is consumed by the smaller invertebrate organisms like bacteria, fungi, or protozoans, which are feeding onto the detritus or dead and decaying organic matter, and thus the detritus food chain starts with the first feeding level, that is decaying organic matter or detritus, and the organism which feeds the detritus called as detritivores. These detritivores are then eaten up by the next level of food chain or a trophic level or feeding level of the food chain, including several small invertebrates in a particular ecosystem. So today we are going to explain the food web. Friends, the food chains, whatever present in the ecosystem, that never operates singly or as an isolated system, or we can say food chains in a natural conditions never operate or never function as an separate or isolated system, but in an ecosystem the various food chains or several food chains are interconnected with each other and forms the some sort of interlocking pattern or a network called as a food web. Single or simple or isolated food chains are rare in nature because each organism may obtain food from more than one trophic level, or in other words, one organism forms the food for more than one organism of the higher trophic level. So it means the any food chain or a single food chain which have minimum of 3 trophic levels and may have 5 or 6 trophic levels in a food chain, means the number of trophic levels or the feeding level are 3 to 5 or 6, and thus each of the trophic level is having a several species of organism. Each trophic level includes several individuals or several organisms belonging to different species, or each of the trophic level have several species of the individuals, and that's why the each of the organism serves as a food for the another more than one organism of the higher trophic level. For example, in a grazing food chain of a grassland, For example, in a grazing food chain of a grassland, in absence of rabbit, grass may also be eaten by mouse or deers. The mouse in turn may be eaten directly by hawk or snake first, then snake which is eaten by hawk or eagle. It means an organism may form a food for many other organisms and thus forming a web or a network or a complex network of feeding in the ecosystem. So, we will repeat the same again. The food chains in a natural conditions never operate as an isolated or a single system in a ecosystem, but in an ecosystem there are several number of food chains and which are interconnected with each other, forming a sort of interlocking or a network or a complex pattern of interlocking of different food chains or several food chains. They interlock and serves for serves as a food for different trophic levels or more than one trophic levels of the other food chains, and thus this complex interlocking mechanism of the food chains is called as a food web. Single or simple or isolated food chains are rare in nature. Means that is the food chains with suppose 3 to 5 trophic levels, and each of the trophic level will not have a individual species of the organism which are feeding on one another or first level to next levels or first trophic level to the next trophic level. Means there are several species. There are several species or several type of organisms may involved in each of the trophic level of the food chain, and thus the several organisms or whatever the organisms or the species of the organisms present in the total ecosystem, they can feed on more than one or two uh, feeding levels or the trophic levels, or they can utilize the several organisms as a food or several species of the organisms as a food, or we can say one organism can eat more number of species. One organism of a particular species can eat or consume several species of organisms and which are belonging to different trophic levels. For example, just like we have explained that in a grazing food chain of the grassland, in absence of rabbit, we know the rabbit is a herbivore which feeding on a grass. But if there are no rabbits, the grass may be eaten by mouse or may be eaten by deers. Means the grass can be eaten up by three different type of organisms or the three different group of organisms, that is a rabbit, mouse or deers, and all these are the herbivores, or all these can be called as primary consumers which are feeding the grass. Means the grass forms a food for three different organisms or three different type of organisms or herbivores such as rabbit, mouse, deer, even cattle. So there are so many animals which can feed onto the grass. Even the insects, there are many of the insects, several species of the insect that are also feeding onto the plant or the plant parts. Means in a grazing food chain only, the grass serves as a food for hundreds of organisms in the ecosystem and serves as a, a complex ecosystem, serves as a food for the several trophic levels. So these organisms may be herbivore, may be omnivore, may be carnivores, may be decomposers. So the one trophic level or the one organism of a species can form or can serve as a food for many organisms, or each of the organism can feed upon several type of feed or food from different sources, or different organisms can be eaten up or consumed by the single organism. Means at a time we can uh, explain that the one organism belonging to a particular trophic level of the food chain can consume several organisms of the lower trophic levels of the food chain, or the organisms whatever present in a particular feeding level or a trophic level of the food chain can serve as a food for several organisms of the higher trophic level, serves as a food for the several organisms of the higher trophic level. For example, just like we are explaining that in a grazing food chain, a grass uh, serves as a food for the rabbit, mouse, or the deers. Then the mouse in turn may be eaten directly by a hawk or by the snakes or by the birds, other birds, carnivore birds. The snake is then eaten by a hawk or an eagle. So the snake can be consumed by different type of carnivore birds or the predatory birds like hawk, eagle, owl, etc. Then the mouse can be directly eaten by hawk, or the mouse can be eaten by snake. The snake is then eaten by hawk or a eagle. So one single organism or one organism may form a food for many other organisms, and thus a forming a network or a web called as food web. The grass is eaten by grasshopper. The grass is eaten by grasshopper, rabbit, and the mouse. Grasshopper is eaten by lizard, which is then eaten by hawk, or rabbit is eaten by hawk. Mouse is eaten by snake, which is then eaten by hawk. In addition, hawk also eats the grasshopper and the mouse, and thus there are five linear food chains, and thus there are five linear food chains which are interconnected to form a web. So we'll explain them one by one as follows. In first case, or in a first linear food chain, see the grass consumed by grasshopper, and grasshoppers can directly consumed or eaten by the hawk. In a second possibility, grass eaten by grasshopper, grasshopper is eaten by lizard, lizard is then eaten by hawk. This is second possibility. Then third, grass eaten by rabbit, and rabbit can be directly eaten by the hawk. Then grass can be eaten by mouse, and mouse can be directly eaten by the hawk. And in fifth possibility, grass is eaten by mouse, the mouse is then eaten by snake, and snake is then eaten by the hawk. So these are the five linear food chains, and these are interconnected to form a food web. Means simply a grass at first feeding level, we can see or we can just think that the grass in all the five linear food chains, grass is the first feeding level, and this grass is eaten by uh, can be eaten by grasshopper, rabbit, mouse, deer, cattle. So there are so many herbivore organisms which can eat or consume the grass. And all these herbivores can be eaten by the carnivores of the first level or the primary consumers, primary carnivores. Primary carnivores can then be eaten by secondary carnivore, then tertiary carnivore or a top carnivore. So, several organisms which are found on a particular feeding level or the trophic level of the food chain can be eaten by more than one, two, or more number of organisms of the higher trophic level, or a particular trophic level of the food chain can form a food for several organisms of the higher trophic level. So, food webs are very important in maintaining the stability of an ecosystem. So, means there won't be an imbalance of a particular species or a particular individuals or particular organisms, species, particular animals, but due to a complex or a interconnection of the different food chains, there is a balance of each of the species of the organism which may present at any trophic level of the food chain. So, food webs are very important in maintaining the stability of ecosystem because of their interdependence. Because of their interdependence. So, for example, the population of the rat, for example, the population of the rat cannot increase much because of presence of snakes or even hawks. If snake is absent, still then the number of rats can be maintained with a certain uh, level or a definite level or the number in the particular ecosystem due to presence of hawk or eagle or owl like birds which are feeding directly onto the rat. So, there is a stability or there is a kind of balance of the organisms or total number of organisms of the particular species. So, stability of an ecosystem is maintained due to the food webs. So, there are different type of food chain. Several food chains can occur at a time in a particular ecosystem, and that's why this forms a interconnection or interlinking of several food chains and forming a food web. So, the for example, absence or a lack of any group of organism cannot affect the balance of the ecosystem. If there is a if there are no snakes or if there are no rabbit or if there are no rat present in a particular ecosystem at a particular time, still then the ecosystem is stable and ecosystem is stable with respect to the number of the organisms of the different species. So, food webs are very important in maintenance of the stability of an ecosystem because of their interdependence. The complexity of any food web, the complexity of any food web depends upon the diversity of organisms in a system. It means the ecosystem or the food web, complexity of any food web depends upon the diversity of organisms in the ecosystem. If there are large number of species of organisms, may be plants, animals, or microorganisms. So this will form a, a complex and a stable type of food web if there are large number of species of organism present in a particular ecosystem, or we can say that there are, since there are large number of organisms present in the particular ecosystem, certainly there are several type of food chains may exist at a time in the ecosystem. This is the diagram representing the food web. So figure, in a figure on the left hand side, we can see a food web shows the main food links and the interconnections of the many food chains. So just we'll explain the diagram on which is present on the left side. So see, in the base there are four type of plants. So there are four different type of plants which are present at a first feeding level or a trophic level, representing four food chains. But we can see there are several animals which are present in the particular ecosystem or different ecosystem, and uh, which are interconnected with one another. So this diagram indicates clearly the interconnections. The diagram indicates the interconnection of the several food chains and different feeding levels or the trophic levels of the food chain, and how they serve a food, how they serve a food for one or more organisms of a higher trophic level, and thus forming a complex network or complex interlocking pattern of the food chains. So in the base we can see, uh, from left side we will explain uh, the plants, aquatic plants, which are present on the left side, which are eaten by the phytoplanktons or zooplanktons. Then these are eaten up by a fish, then aquatic birds, and these birds can be eaten by the tiger. So in a left hand side figure, we can explain several food chains at a time, and also the cross linking of these different food chains and how they serve, or how the different organisms of higher trophic level feeding on to the lower trophic levels of the another food chains. So in a left side diagram, we can see the plants or the producers may be aquatic ecosystem or terrestrial ecosystem that serves as a producer or acts as a producer. So there are different plants which are present on the uh, lower side of the image. So the grasses or the aquatic plants which are consumed by the aquatic herbivores or the aquatic insects or mollusk or aquatic insects or the copypods, amphipods. So there are several organisms which are present as aquatic invertebrates which are feeding onto the aquatic plants and or the phytoplanktons. So phytoplanktons can be eaten by zooplanktons, or these phytoplanktons and zooplanktons or the aquatic plants altogether can be consumed by a fish, maybe herbivore fish, or the carnivore fish can consume the aquatic invertebrates or a small fish. So this can be consumed by the carnivore fish. So small fish, herbivore fish or carnivore fish which are then consumed by the birds, which are the aquatic birds feeding onto the aquatic organisms, and these birds can be eaten by the tiger. In the next phase, we can see the grasshoppers, for example, which are feeding on to the grasses. These grasshoppers can be eaten or consumed by the frogs or the birds or the aquatic birds, terrestrial birds as well as aquatic birds, terrestrial birds or as well as aquatic birds can feed or can eat the grasshoppers, even frogs. So these are the three different carnivore animals belonging to higher trophic level of three different food chains but are feeding on to the grasshoppers. So these snake, for example, the snake can be eaten by a hawk or the snake can be eaten by the eagle. Then the snake can be eaten by other bird. The bird can be eaten by tiger or these different animals like deer or the wolf or the sheep, goat, rabbits, which are forming the lower trophic levels that can be eaten by the top carnivores. Again, in the figure, we can explain that the aquatic uh, organisms can be eaten by the birds, then can be eaten by frogs, then also by the grasshoppers, then the beetles which are feeding onto the plants which can be consumed by the birds, then the birds can be eaten by the snake or can be eaten by the wool or eagle or hawk. Then mouse can eat the grass. The same mouse can be eaten by cat or owl or the snake, and these animals then can be eaten by the top carnivores. So the cat, rabbit, sheep, goat, wolf, even the herbivore like a deer, which is feeding onto the grass, can be eaten by the tiger. So these are the different food chains, but which are interlocked with one another, and the one organism of the particular feeding level or the trophic level serves as a food for more number of organisms of the higher trophic levels of the another food chains or the different food chains. In a right hand side diagrammatic sketch, we can also explain the food web in a pond. So, in a pond ecosystem, there are mainly macrophytes or microphytes or phytoplanktons type of plants or the producers. So, in a pond ecosystem, producers are the aquatic plants or the algae, which may be a rooted plants or the algae or a phytoplanktons and serve as a producers. So these macrophytes or the rooted plants of the pond ecosystem are consumed by insect larvae, beetles, mites, mollusks, crustaceans. So there are several type of aquatic invertebrates which can feed on to the rooted macrophytes or the producers or the rooted plants of the pond ecosystem, which are then eaten directly either by small fish or which can be then eaten by insect or the small herbivore fish can also feed directly onto the macrophytes or the producers. Again, these producers can directly eaten by the small fish or a large herbivore fish. Then these small herbivore fish can then be eaten by a carnivore fish. Similarly, the phytoplanktons or the algae, microscopic or submicroscopic algae or the aquatic plants representing microphytes or phytoplanktons which can be consumed by the zooplanktons This zooplankton then can be eaten by small fish, or the phytoplanktons can directly be eaten by the small fish. So, the one trophic level forms a food for more number of organisms of the next or a higher trophic levels, and thus forming a complex network or a web of the food chain. So in these figures, both the figures which are representing a several food chains which are present in a single ecosystem. There is a evidence or presence of several food chains present in the particular ecosystem and how they are interconnected with one another. So this is what about the food web. So food web is nothing but a, a complex interlocking pattern or a complex interlocking mechanism of several food chains at a time in a particular ecosystem, and the stability of the uh, ecosystem, particular ecosystem, or stability of the food web of in a particular ecosystem depends upon the number of species or different type of organisms present in the ecosystem. So today we'll stop here, and next time we'll continue with the another topic, that is energy pyramid.